region. Mount Bachelor, the ski resort, just to the southwest of Bend, the Three Sisters. What a bike ride out there. The Douglas Fir Forest that just make up this incredible geographic region. Oregon, what a beautiful place.
Sweet Joe.
You made it.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Ralph?
Welcome to paradise.
I can tell. And then this was the Billy Crystal game.
Yeah, that was in January of that year, Clipper-Laker game, and Gillian Zucker had come up a couple of months earlier to our broadcast location. I'm preparing for the game. It's probably 6:30 or something, and so can I talk to you? I said, yeah. It's kind of an unusual time for her to want to talk. And I said, yeah. She said, we have a fan that would like to come and work a game with you. And I said, what do you mean work a game? She said, like be your color person. I said, for the whole game? And she said, yeah, for the whole game. I go, I guess so. Is it important to the club? She said, yes, that's very important. And okay. She said, you want to know who it is? I said, yeah, sure. She said, Billy Crystal.
I wasn't shocked, but I was impressed by how seriously he took being the color analyst for that game.
He was home and he was practicing in front of a monitor with the game on, and yeah. So I was delighted, and he took it very seriously and did some serious prep work, and we're still in communication several times a year. What looks like a good spot for this?
Well, welcome into Clippers Talk All Access. I'm here at the Lawler compound with the great Ralph Lawler. Ralph, I was going to start things off asking you if you ever miss broadcasting, but after being at your place like this, I can see the appeal. I might retire and rent out a room if you'll let me.
Well, great. We'll do that. Very reasonable rate. Yeah.
Now, you said, and I want to talk a lot about the book, but also expand on some things. You talked about Doc Rivers and how important he was when he came in, because you were thinking about retirement around that time, and you ended up staying 6 more seasons, 6 more years, just because of Doc Rivers. Just talk about that relationship a little bit, because obviously he wrote the afterword in the book, Bingo, 40 Years in the NBA.
It was interesting because my wife and I were actually packing at our apartment, Marina Del Rey, had boxes all over the place. We hadn't told the ball club or people at Fox Sports in those days that we were retiring, but we were done. And then they, boom, announced that Doc had been hired, and I go, oh, wow. And Fox asked me to MC the telecast of his signing news conference. And I said, well, I'll do that. And I go over to the training center and meet with Doc up in what would be his office before we came down to the dais to put on the TV thing. And I said, after we enjoyed seeing each other for the first time in a while, because we'd been friends from his days playing with us to all the years going back and forth in Orlando and Boston, we'd run into him as the coach of the opposing team. And I just really liked him. We had a really nice relationship. And I said, my wife has been traveling with me for the ball club for the past 15 years, whatever it was. I said, would you be okay with that? He said, absolutely, we're not going to change that. And I go, wow. So we do this thing. I go home to Joe and say, well, let's unpack these boxes. And we just, he was such a pleasure to be with from a personal standpoint, and from a professional standpoint, he was the best ever. I mean, you needed something, you got it from Doc.
You can definitively say the chances of you making a trade before the deadline are between 0 and 10,
0
right?
and 10 on a 0 to 10 scale.
Man, oh man, that's very, very good. Exclusive, you heard it first, right here.
You mentioned, obviously, he played for a short time with the Clippers. You broadcasted some games with him, I believe, later on.
Yeah, he wound up coming back and being our color guy when Walton had a conflict or something like that. And I could tell immediately he was going to be a sensation as a broadcaster. He could have had a long career doing that, but they keep bringing him back to coach. People in LA seem to think he can't coach a lick, but he was out of work for about 5 minutes when Philadelphia hired him. He was out of work for another 10 minutes when Milwaukee hired him. He's a very good coach. He's an extraordinary leader.
Let's hear it for Doc Rivers.
Thank you, Donald. Thank you, Shelley.
Because you know him so well, I want to ask you, how do you think he was portrayed? Was he represented correctly in the show on Hulu, Clipped, which also, of course, you were on?
Fishburne did the depiction, and I just didn't think it was the right choice. Doc is not a real easy man to emulate on screen because he is many-faceted in his personality. I just thought his leadership style was different than what was portrayed on television.
How faithful did you find the show to what actually occurred back in 2014 during that time?
Pretty accurate. I think it was pretty accurate. There were some things that were missed because these people weren't there. That crazy day when it was Game 4, Clippers were up 2-1, when the news hits for a Sunday game, and it was crazy. Sterling wanted to go to the game with Shelley, his wife, and Doc was able to fortunately prevail on that you cannot set foot in that arena. It'll just bizarre, you know. He didn't want Sterling and his entourage to be on the team plane coming up, but Sterling made it clear, I own the team. Me and my 6 minions are going to be there. And so they were. But he went home separately. Now, my wife, Jo, there wasn't room in the plane for her, so she flew up commercially and was going to fly home commercially after the game. And she takes a cab to the airport and gets there, and she walks in, and there's Sterling in the lobby. And he said, Jo, you've known me a long time. Do you think I'm a racist? And Jo, God love her, handled it beautifully and excused herself to go to the ladies' room. But that was a heck of a greeting at the airport. And then he winds up sitting up in the first class section flying home, and right across the aisle from him and right behind him are wives of Clipper players. It was an awkward flight, believe me, and one of many awkward moments it was awful.
How did you feel like he was depicted in the show? Because I love Ed O'Neill, but it almost seemed like they tried to make him entertaining and sharper than he was. How did you feel about the way they presented him?
I don't think he was entertaining. Sterling was not entertaining. I think he was pretty sharp, and I thought that depiction was just fine. And he and the woman who played Shelley looked so much like Sterling and Shelley, I forgot that it was not they. But I just thought there was a harshness with him. I just didn't think it was perfect, but it was darn near perfect. I thought those two were the two best depictions. Also, the fellow played Andy Roser. I thought it was Andy Roser. But it was interesting that the way it was done.
Without the Donald Sterling distraction during that time on the team and the emotional toll it took, do you believe that Clippers team could have gone on to win the championship?
I think that was the best chance they had, to tell you the truth. I think that was the best Clipper team that there was. And Bill Walton told me years ago, he said, Ralph, I'd be all enthusiastic this time of the year before the season. Oh, this is the year, you know. And he said, Ralph, as long as Sterling owns the team, they're not going to win. Just accept that. They're not going to win as long as he owns the team. Well, this year, it looked like they really were destined to be as good as anybody in the league with a great chance to win the championship. And Sterling found a way to screw that up, too. So hats off to Bill, because he was right.
You never came across as beat down or wore down by having to work with Donald Sterling and working for a team at that time that had seasons where they won 12 games, 17 games, 15 games. How did you maintain that level of positivity throughout it, Ralph?
Love of the game, most of all. I think I just absolutely love basketball. I've loved it since I was a 8-year-old kid, I guess. And I never had the responsibility of having a team win. I wasn't responsible if they lost. So I had nothing to do with their winning or losing. I only had to do with putting on a good radio broadcast or a good telecast. I had some control over that. And there were many, many times where after a game, Joe and I would drive home and she'd be all set because the Clippers lost by 2 or by 20 or by 30 sometimes. And I'd be, oh, we had a great show. I really nailed it. You know, I'd be all up and excited, and she'd be, oh God, that's awful. So it was all about the craft. I really enjoyed it.
One of the most powerful parts in the book to me is how open and honest you were about your life. You expressed some regret with your first marriage, working for Donald Sterling. You mentioned you felt like, you know, the organization at times was emboldening him. Was there ever a point where employees behind the scenes got together and said, hey, we're going to do this about Donald Sterling, where there could be a revolt, a walkout, express some level of concern to the NBA, or was it just at some point he'll be his own undoing, is what everybody thought?
I don't know what they thought at that point in time. Nobody liked working for Donald Sterling. Nobody did. Maybe Andy did, but nobody else certainly did. But he was the boss. He owned it lock, stock, and barrel. One of the last of the private citizen ownership of a professional sports team. And he just felt it's going to be like this forever, because I don't think anybody thought he would ever sell the team. I think thought he had it forever, and we were just kind of stuck with it.
And I read this in the book, and I wasn't sure if you could expand on this, but was there a time in 1983 where he said, we're tanking intentionally for Ralph Sampson? I think he was fined for those comments, where the league started to get an inkling of who he was and looking into possibly getting rid of him.
I was seated right next to him when he made the comment, and I can't quote it exactly. You did not quote it exactly either, but it was more than just inferred that we're better off losing and getting the first pick. And just the thought that an owner would say we're better off losing was enough to make the league go positively nuts. And they did, and he was appropriately fined. But any Clipper fan or any observer in the media, that they'd be a lot better off losing and getting Ralph Sampson than winning and not. And there are just dozens of stories about Donald Sterling that do not paint him well.
Who's Elgin Baylor? Because this was really especially poignant to me. Who does he become as a basketball executive if he didn't have his hands tied because of Donald Sterling? It felt like he was succeeding at times in spite of his owner.
Well, there's no question about it. I had a fellow named Matt Winnick who was with the NBA for many, many years, for decades. After Elgin was late in his career, named Executive of the Year in the NBA. One of his second to the last season, probably on the job. And Winnick said when I was in New York, we'd always see him at Clipper Knick games. Poor Elgin, he took the abuse all those years, and the team was bad for stuff that wasn't his fault. It was the owner's fault. And now he wins Executive of the Year, and it's probably not because of him. Because Doc was calling most of the shots in this final couple of seasons for Elgin. But I think, to more directly answer your question, I think Elgin would have been revered as a brilliant basketball mind had he worked for somebody other than Donald Sterling, who would allow him, because he almost always wanted to do the right thing, and he almost always was not allowed to do it. Sterling would say, no. And So Elgin just kind of went along with it. I think when he first got the job, I think he needed the job. He never got paid anything close to league average, what general managers received then or now. And I think he needed the job all those years, and was glad to have it, and just kind of rolled with the punches with Sterling.
Why couldn't Larry Brown have stayed on a little bit as a head coach? I know it wasn't in his nature. He was kind of a nomad, but you had a couple of seasons in a row making the playoffs under him. You mentioned there may have been a strained relationship between him and Danny Manning. Did Donald Sterling also play into that? Because it sounded like there may have been a lifetime contract out there for Larry Brown.
Well, Sterling would talk about that kind of stuff, but when it comes to signing a lifetime contract with anybody, I wouldn't want to bank on it. But I was in Sterling's office. He used to call me in like every off season to come up and sit down in this big office of his, parquet floor and Louis Vuitton furniture, and you'd sit there like sitting mid-court at the old Staples Center or at the new Intuit Dome, and just the two of us. And he said, "Okay, now should I get rid of Larry Brown or should I get rid of Danny Manning?" And I said, "You shouldn't get rid of either one of them." I mean, he's your best player, and he's one of the best coaches in the history of the league. And he just felt he had to, separate the two of them. Because they were oil and water, unfortunately. And it's odd because Danny, wins a championship in college under Larry, and is the centerpiece of a very good professional basketball team under Larry. But I don't know what it was that made them dislike each other. Danny was named to the All-Star team, whatever year this was, 90, 91, in there somewhere. And so I think at halftime they had me come out and say, "Here's Danny Manning, Clipper All-Star." It's a big deal, Clippers having an All-Star in those days. And so after the game, I'm in the office talking to Larry, and he says, "What are you out there praising Danny Manning for? Whose side you on?" Oh my God, I'm on the Clipper side, And but that was the nature. And the two of them had a near fight in the lobby in the old Fisher Hotel in Milwaukee. On a road trip, we came up from Chicago or someplace and got in the lobby, and the two of them they're shouting at each other. It's 2:00 in the morning, and assistant coaches had to go in and break them up, or they would have had an honest-to-God fist fight. So it's strange stuff.
When hardships hit this team, Ralph, I always look to the hope with Steve Ballmer now, because they say, well, ownership is the biggest advantage in sports, meaning the Clippers were basically at a disadvantage for about 40 seasons under Donald Sterling. Just what did you notice immediately when Steve Ballmer took over in 2014 and the breath of fresh air he brought with him?
Well, the biggest thing, I think, was just his nature. Before he was even approved as owner, they had a staff meeting up in a big room at Staples Center with the entire staff, all the front office staff, all the basketball staff, everybody, anything to do with the club. I was sitting at a table next to Tyronn Lue, as a matter of fact, and Brian Seaman. Three of us sitting there. Ty was negotiating with Cleveland to be their head coach. He wound up being an assistant coach there. But we're sitting there, and Ballmer walks out, and none of us had ever met Steve. We just knew him from the videos we've seen of his Microsoft days. And he says, "Hi, my name is Steve. You call me Steve." And right away I thought, whoa. Because Donald Sterling, you didn't call him Don or Donald. If you were very close, you might call him DTS. But we had an assistant coach named Dave Wohl one year in a meeting when Bob Weiss was the head coach. And he says, "Don, what we have to do is," and he said, "You don't call me Don. I'm Mr. Sterling." And so that's the difference. Donald Sterling was Mr. Sterling. Steve Ballmer was Steve. And he was Steve to everybody, the ushers in the arena, the security people to the ball boys. He was Steve, and what a difference. And he gave out email addresses, one of which was his personal email address. He said, if you got something you want to direct and get an immediate response from me, use this. And he gave out his cell phone numbers, and it just was, the difference was so stark. You thought, okay, now, and plus he was the richest owner in professional sports. That was just a little icing, on the cake. But he was so determined to win. I'm surprised that the Clippers haven't won a championship yet for him, because he's given them everything that an owner can possibly give.
Speaking of, what do you think the Clippers having their own arena will do for expanding the brand and just having a stronger foothold in Los Angeles, which is so competitive with sports teams?
I've seen video tours of the building, so I have a bit of a sense of what it's going to be like. We won't really know till there's 17,000, 18,000 people in there and the game, and they've got the wall, and see the effect of all that. I can't wait to see what that is like. But just being separate from the Lakers, I think, will be a great thing. It was, in many ways, better when they had the old LA Sports Arena, as torn down and rotten as it was. At least it was the Clippers building. I think that when Doc took over, they changed the interior by covering up all the Laker banners and putting up pictures of the Clipper players and so on. You'd walk into that building the last 10 years or whatever it's been, and it looks like a Clipper arena, which helped. But you still knew that the Lakers had the superior locker room just a couple of doors down the hallway. And you were second-class citizens. Third class, really. The Kings were number one, Lakers number two, Clippers number three. And I think it might take a long time. Might take winning a championship for one thing, but I think people when they go into that building, Staples Center, which is still whatever it's called now, the crypto.com, whatever, is going to look like a shoddy old building compared to what the Clippers have, and that'll be apparent to players, fans, media, everybody. So it'd be fun to see the first reaction of everybody when they have their first game there. Yeah.
Who do you think should be the first Clippers player to have their jersey retired at Intuit Dome? Who exemplified being a Clipper the most to you?
Well, Blake Griffin certainly comes to mind, and Chris Paul was not yet retired, amazingly. One of those two, and I have appealed to the club already to do something to honor Bill Walton, whether it's as a player or as a broadcaster or as just a personage representing the Clippers, because his imprint and impact was great. And I hope they do something to honor Bill, whether it's a number 32 or whether it's a 32 slash and a microphone, whatever. I would love to see that. I guess I'd like to see that first.
Let's talk more about your friend Bill, who passed away earlier this year. The great Bill Walton. How did you know him, Ralph? Personally, behind the scenes, who he was there, day-to-day life. I know you guys went on a trip together. This is somebody that, was transformative for basketball, was a great ambassador for the game, but also he wrote the foreword for your book. You had 2 chapters about him. I know what a great friend he was to you.
Well, I cannot wrap my head around the fact that he's gone. It just doesn't seem possible. Bill was 72, so he's 14 years younger than me. I never ever dreamed I would outlive Bill Walton. Maybe the most extraordinary man I've ever met. I first saw Bill play in high school at Helix High School in San Diego in late 60s, 69 or so, I guess it was. They just kept winning state championships, and I heard about this big, tall, skinny, redheaded kid, and was working in Riverside at the time, and drove down to see him play, and he was extraordinary. His brother Bruce was on the same team. And then when he was a rookie, I write it rather extensively in the book about they used to have the first pick in the draft every year rather than going to the arena and being mobbed by, a horde of reporters at the same time. They would bring the star player to a hotel room, ballroom, and then invite the media in 3 or 4 hours before the game. And Bill showed up in a lumberjack outfit with a ponytail and a bandana and boots on, and just kind of sat down like this. And there was no place else on earth he would less like to be than there. And he just kind of muttered and stammered 1 or 2 word answers to everybody, and people just shook their heads when it was over. So that was my next, and then after that it was 1977 when the 76ers, whose games I did on television, were playing the Trailblazers in Portland for the championship in the NBA Finals, and Bill was dominating. I mean, just took the game right away from Sixers won the first 2 games, and it looked like going to win this series easy, and fly back to Portland for game 3 and 4 and got whipped in both of them, and then lost game 5 in Philadelphia, and then lost game 6 in Portland, with Walton being as good as anybody's ever been.
Walton on the lob. Oh, he got it in! Bill Walton got it in! Korczyk and Gross. What a sequence for the Blazers! Walton again, twice at the basket. I can't believe that first play.
And so I was in the locker room, got photos of Bill being interviewed with me in the background. And then just 2 years later, Gene Shue is our head coach in San Diego, and Gene and I would play racquetball every day. And one day, driving to or from our racquetball appointment, he said, "I think I got a great chance to get Bill Walton." I said, "What?" Which would be like getting Jokic or Doncic today. I mean, and so Gene flew up to Portland from San Diego and made his pitch, and Bill said yes. And the city of San Diego all of a sudden realized there was a professional basketball team in town. This was year 2 of the Clippers in San Diego. And the city was going nuts. They were flying airplanes carrying banners along the beach. Bill Walton's a Clipper. And it was big news. Clippers made Walton the biggest free agent signing in NBA history and made the Big Redhead the league's first $1 million a year player in seizing him off the Trailblazer roster. And so Bill and I really developed a close bond and friendship. That year, he was hurt much of the year, surprise, surprise. And he and I did a radio program together, 1 hour a week, and we just spent a lot of time together. And when he was playing, we'd hang out together on the road, and it was just fascinating to hear him talking about, he was such a great student of the game, how he's going to take away Kareem's right-hand sky hook. So I'm going to make a left-handed player out of him. He'll be a lefty tonight. And so he just wouldn't let him turn over that left shoulder and make him turn over the right shoulder. And his left-handed hook was not anything close to what his right-handed sky hook was. And just to get that kind of input from Bill before a game made me sound like a pretty good broadcaster. So I owed a lot of that to Bill, because nobody spent more time getting you ready for a ball game than Bill, and mentally. I mean, he studying was film in those days, not everybody has it now on their computer, but and he talked to people, and he just spent the entire day getting ready. Tonight I'm going to face whoever it was, and it was a lesson to me as a broadcaster about how hard these guys work and why the great ones are great, and the others just go to the game. Who we playing tonight? Bill knew who he was playing for sure.
In reading the book, and I reread it over this past weekend to prepare for the interview, it got me a little misty-eyed reading the foreword from Bill Walton, talking about how, you introduced him to the world as a broadcaster, and it seemed like it almost renewed his love and passion for the game and gave him a new lease on life, it sounded like, in some ways, because he seemed a little bit lost at the time. I know you guys met up, it was happenstance or fate, at a 7-Eleven in 1990, and that's where you reconnected and encouraged him to become a broadcaster. Just talk about that part of Bill Walton, and because he became a star, Ralph.
Yeah, Bill retired after winning a championship with the Celtics, and the next year he was injured and couldn't play, and so he finally knew he had to hang up his life as a player, and he didn't have any idea what he was going to do with his life. And again, it might just have been fate. Joe and I were walking the beach, got thirsty, so we come a block off the beach in the 7-Eleven and there's Bill ahead of us in line. And so we have a nice little, man hug and reunion. I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I have nothing. I don't know what I'm going to do. He said, I'm lost. I've been a ball player as long as I can remember, and now I'm not." And we had an opening for a broadcaster, for a partner for me on TV. I said, "How about television?" He goes, "Yeah, right." He's a big, goofy-looking guy with a stutter and a stammer, but he got to thinking about it, and he went down and he worked CBA games, which was the minor leagues for the NBA in those days, Continental Basketball Association, worked the games on radio for free. They were thrilled to death to have him as a color commentator, and he kind of liked it. And he worked with Marty Glickman, no less, the NBA's first real voice back in the 50s, to help handle his stammer and stutter, and helped him find a way to get over it. And so the ball club yeah, having Bill Walton would be pretty cool, And so Bill came in, worked 30 games for us, I guess, maybe. And they hired him in Dallas to work some games. And they fired him every other game because some outlandish thing that he said. And then they'd bring him back and they'd fire him again. And somehow the Clipper front office was able to accept him because he would say lighthearted, well-intentioned, but brutal things about Michael Lewicandy, who was the Clippers' #1 draft pick, and first pick in the draft. And everybody thought he was going to be the next Kareem, and he wasn't. And Bill would just outlandish comments about, and that's why the Clippers drafted Michael Lewicandy. I mean, after he just fumbled the ball out of bounds. And somehow I'm amazed that the thin-skinned front office of the day for the Clippers was able to accept that. But because I think our TV ratings in the 90s, and there was not a good section there. Bill Fitch did get one team to the playoffs in Houston for a first round and out, but there was one bad team after another. And if you go back and research the ratings, our TV ratings were the highest they've ever been, and that was because of Bill. I mean, he just he kind of reminds me of Howard Cosell, who'd rank number one your favorite sportscaster and number one your least favorite sportscaster. Bill kind of had that. I mean, everybody had an opinion about Bill. Everybody talked about Bill. They might not like him, but they'd listen so they could complain about him. And he was something.
There's forever going to be a void in the game without Bill Walton, in the broadcasting world without Bill Walton. He had such a unique style and way of entertaining all of us. I'm wondering, Ralph, because you knew him so well, what's something we can all learn from the way Bill Walton lived his life?
He was, I think, the most generous, caring man I've ever known. I used to say, except for my father, but he was just so extraordinary. Bill never asked you for anything, but offered everything. If you'd happen to a restaurant and he was seated across the way, you'd go to pay your bill, and Mr. Walton took care of this. When I had prostate cancer 17, 18 years ago, the first person to come visit when I got home from my convalescence was Bill and his wife, Lori. And a week later, they were back again. They just, extraordinary. They invited us, along with another 15 friends or so, on a whitewater rafting trip down the Colorado River through the heart of the Grand Canyon some years ago, and it was 18 days, 17 nights. My wife Jo said, "I'll go, but you've got to get me a butane hair curler," because there's no facilities of any sort, just the river and the canyon. No restrooms, no showers, nothing. And so I go find a butane hair curler, and she used it the first morning and then never again. It was just the adventure of a lifetime. When the two of us talk, what's been great in our relationship, what was the greatest, it was those 2.5 weeks with Bill and Lori and a bunch of friends of theirs. It had to cost him $100,000, $200,000. And he took care of all of it for all of us. And he just wanted to do that for his friends. He did it again 2 years later. We couldn't go because that was when the team was playing in Russia in the preseason. And but so he did that twice with his friends. And I know at least a dozen people, and probably a dozen more I don't know, who feel that Bill was their best friend and that they were his best friend. And Bill told me many, many times, "You're my best friend ever." But I'm not the only person he said that to. That doesn't make me at some pinnacle. But that's the way it was. If he was here with you, you'd be his best friend while you're here. And to make somebody feel that way is pretty extraordinary. And his passing was so stunning to me. He was doing Pac-12 games on television. And I understand that in February he couldn't work anymore. They brought Don McLean in to replace him. Well, I don't follow Pac-12 basketball. Certainly I don't now, but I didn't then either. And so I was unaware of it. But Bill would normally call every 3 or 4 weeks, and we'd talk for 15 minutes or half an hour. And I hadn't heard from him, and I was thinking, what's going on with Bill? But I did not call. On my birthday, let me just read this to you. This is April 21st of this year. Happy birthday, champ. We love you. We miss you. Shine on, heal on. Thanks for my life, Bill. Peace and love. Now, that was like a month before he passed. And he knew at that point that he was terminally ill. And not a word, not a hint about him. I've talked to Lori, his wife, since he passed, and she said he did not want anybody but the boys, his 4 sons, to know. He said he did, and he refused to have any kind of a service, no memorial service, and would have, hundreds of thousands of people would have shown up. And I just really regret I didn't get a chance to put my arm around him, tell him I love him. Make me cry now. it's a void that's impossible to fill.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Ralph.
Yeah.
And what a special person. God bless Bill Walton. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about the late, great Jerry West. We know what he meant to the game, but from a Clippers perspective, what did he mean to the organization as an executive with this team his last few years?
Well, I think it really increased the realization of the fan base and the media that this franchise was for real. Because Jerry had been not just such a great player, but a great executive with the Lakers in Memphis and finally with Golden State. It was a long road to get Jerry here because many years ago when Elgin was GM, I get a call from Andy Roser, who was the team president at the time, and said, I think we got a chance to get Jerry West. And I go, what about Elgin? And he said, no, Elgin's on board with this. He thinks that we just give him, if it was Jerry and Elgin going into Sterling and said, we got to do this, that it would just really increase the power of the basketball executives to get what they needed to be good. And finally, Jerry said no, and he took the job in Memphis. And then sometime later, after Elgin left, they went to Jerry again, and he did not want to take the job. He felt it would be unloyal to Elgin to replace him, so he didn't. So this was the third time, which proved to be the charm. Enough time had passed from the Elgin era, and with Ballmer now having the ball club, I think Jerry, it made sense. But there was the sense of legitimacy that never existed before. And I remember at Hawaii training camp the first year, Brian and I would be sitting up in the stands looking down at the practice section, and there'd be Jerry in Clipper gear talking to players and coaches and go, oh my God, that's Jerry West, you know. And then Jerry would come up and he'd sit down with us, not at our request, but he just knew it was something good to do. And Brian and I would learn more about the team and about basketball in that half hour that we had all season long. Because Jerry was as frank in his appraisal of players and open to anybody who asked. He said, that guy will never be able to dribble once to his right, ever. It'll never happen, you know. And you'd watch, and pretty soon you'd say, this guy, they have to force him right because he wants to go left all the time. You know that because Jerry West told you that. And it was, even when he was the GM of the Lakers, I'd walk out the tunnel to the car parking lot with him, and he'd drop 2 or 3 dimes about players in his team. He'd go, I can't believe he told me that, you know. And so Jerry he spoke what was on his mind. I see he's going to be inducted into the Hall of Fame in a 3rd different category now as an executive. I know that his widowed bride is very proud of that, as well she should be, but there'll be 3 different ways that he's in there as a contributor, as a executive, and as a player. That's pretty extraordinary. But here's the real star of the show. Without her, there would have been no 40-year career, believe me. My sweet Joe.
Sure.
Having her travel with us for all the games. I'm quite sure that Joe has seen more Clipper games than any fan in the world. I mean, between all the
good and the bad, the ugly.
season ticket holder in San Diego when I met her, and all the home games at Staples Center and at the San Diego Sports Arena, LA Sports Arena, games at Anaheim, and then all around the league. She was there for all of them. And nobody screamed or shouted louder than she.
It was fun.
Sweet Joe, you had to be in enemy territory at times, right? In the crowd with the opposition on the road?
Oh, God, I could just feel it right now. Yes. I was usually pretty quiet when I was in the opposing arenas. I was sitting by myself, so I didn't want to, draw attention to me. So it was fun, except one time in, I think it was Salt Lake City, got a little carried away. There were some people really getting carried away in front of me. I tried to break it up. And the security finally came in and moved me to a different seat. So that was traumatic, but everything else, I was usually by myself.
What do you think? The next book is a Sweet Joe and the Lion's Den?
That could be.
But she was like a den mother to the players. So
Not sure about that.
oh, well, you were. I mean, Cat Mobley used to just be so gentlemanly with you, and they love Joe more than they love me, I think, and I don't blame them, because I totally understandable.
Sure.
I was wondering, Ralph, do you have the photo? Because I remember as I was seated right behind him, and probably had less of a view of the game this particular night, but when Bill did that last game with you in the regular season, he brought that painting.
Yeah.
Do you have that somewhere?
I thought it was on the wall here, I thought.
I'm sure I could find it.
Oh, here it is. Here it is. Right here. It amazed me. I don't know who Bill went to get some of the information, because there were things there I have no idea how he knew about them, but they wound up getting into his artist's head and onto the canvas from our days in Peoria, my days at Bradley University, Philadelphia, and all the LA stuff. And there's the Grand Canyon, and Bill and I above the Grand Canyon. Our vision was really from this river. You're welcome to Bend, Oregon, and Joe fittingly with a halo. I think Joe probably insisted the halo be there, I think.